everyone. My name is Jen Eckenwiler, and the photo that I chose was a photo from the 1992 Summer Olympics in Barcelona. This photo was published by the Dallas Morning News and taken by a photographer named Ken Geiger. And it is a picture of the British athlete Derek Redmond. If you don't know the story behind this image, it takes place after Redmond had injured himself in the 400-meter semifinals. He tried to keep going and didn't want help up, and he hopped along the track and was struggling to keep up his pace. Then his father, Jim Redmond, jumped out of the stands past security and onto the track to help his son finish the race. Redmond's father wouldn't allow anyone to come near his son, and he helped him over the finish line. I chose this photo because I kept searching and searching for a heartwarming Pulitzer Prize winner. As I looked through the winners for Spot News Photography, a lot of the photos were taken after tragedy had hit and were extremely emotional and sometimes even hard to look at. But this image was emotional for another reason. Most breaking news photos have to do with tragedy or disaster and are remarkable because the photographer was there at just the right time. This photo stood out to me because it was something unique that had happened at an already popular event. There were probably thousands of photographers at the Olympics, and they all had an important job to do by documenting the events and athletes. But the photographer that was stationed at this event was lucky enough to have been able to capture something unique and remarkable at the Olympics. I think that a Pulitzer Prize winning photo should be one that is memorable and tells a story, not necessarily one that just looks appealing. In fact, there were several other photos that I could have chosen that looked more impressive and were very beautiful, but this image stood out because of the story behind it. I wasn't looking for just a pretty photo, I looked for one that made me smile or warmed my heart, and this one definitely did. When viewing images from the Olympics, you expect to see images of the winners and the events and maybe even some of the audience. However, those pictures are not always as memorable because we have new ones that are very similar every 4 years. This image, however, has a much more interesting story to it than just people competing. Injuries that occur at the Olympics are much more emotional and impactful than other sports events, and you can't help but feel for those athletes. People remember the two men in this image and still refer to it every so often, which is one of the reasons I chose it. I wasn't alive when the 1992 Olympics happened, but I do remember seeing a video about Redmond and his dad a few years ago and about how inspiring it was to see him not give up and see his father help him, even when they thought he lost everything. The fact that people still remember this moment more than 25 years later just shows how remarkable that moment must have been in person. And seeing the photo from the Pulitzer Prize winner helps us feel that moment too. In the original NBC Sports clip, the announcer that was commentating on this event described this as the Olympic spirit, and I couldn't agree more. Moments like this are what we remember the most about the Olympics because they remind us that the super athletes on the screen are still human. I think this photo is impactful because it does tell a story and it piques interest and it is different than what we typically see in Olympic photos. If you were scrolling through photos from the 92 Olympics, this probably would be the one that stood out to you the most. Although most sports news photos are impressive and interesting to look at from a photography standpoint, I think this photo is impactful because it tells a story, which is what photojournalism is all about. It is unique because it is clear that Redmond's father is not an Olympic athlete, nor is he an Olympic official or coach. So automatically, the viewer of the photo will start asking questions or see that something is different because usually only the athletes and the officials are the ones photographed. If they are around at the time, audiences may even remember Derek Redmond and instantly smile at the thought of that story, just like I did. As I mentioned before, it is extremely important for good photojournalism to tell a story. Our textbook defines photojournalism on page 248 as the marriage of images and text to tell a better story that either text or photographs could tell alone. I think that photojournalism includes an image that makes you want to read the corresponding text and text that explains more detail for the viewer of the photo. For example, when explaining this image, I would not have wanted to just say, runner Derek Redmond is assisted across the finish line after injury, because the viewer can already see that that's what's happening in the photo. The corresponding text has to give the reader facts that the image can't give, and gives the photo more meaning. If I was writing a photojournalism piece about this photo, I would explain some of Redmond's background and his relationship with his father and see if he had any previous injuries and explain why it was so important for him to finish the race, even though he had lost. Then I would explain that it was his father helping him across the finish line and explain more of that relationship. Knowing that the second man in the photo was Redmond's father automatically made it more emotionally appealing to me, and the rest of the story that I knew from many years ago helped embellish those emotions even more. I think that it's crucial for the images used in photojournalism to tell as much of the story as possible, and for them to set up the accommodating story well enough to be an interesting story. My friend, who is a photojournalism major, describes photojournalism as telling stories by documenting them through photos, and I think that this image does that really well.